Welcome back for Unit 6 of Telecare's online training. The topic of today is grief and bereavement. Some learning objectives for Unit 6 are that by the end of this section, you will have a basic understanding of the stages of grief, how to support a grieving person, and how to recognize complicated grief. Grief and bereavement. Grief is a natural response to loss. It is the emotional suffering one feels when something or someone that you love is taken away. The more significant the loss, the more intense the grief will be. We may associate grief with the death of a loved one, which is often the cause of the most intense grief, but any loss can cause grief. As always, we must empathize with our callers and attempt to understand and respect their feelings and explore the situations that may be causing them to feel bereaved. Our callers may be experiencing grief to any number of circumstances, including divorce or a breakup, loss of health, whether physical or emotional, loss of a job through layoff or retirement, death of a pet, loss of financial stability, or loss of independence. The more significant the loss in our caller's perception, the more intense the grief. For example, one might experience grief after moving away from home, graduating from college, changing jobs, selling a family home, or retiring from a long-time career. Many of our callers experience complex grief, which can be complicated by mental health issues. They grieve the loss of the life they had planned, the relationship that they have lost, or a future that they dreamed of having. All of these things have changed because of their diagnosis. It is difficult for a person to feel comfortable experiencing someone else's grief, who always knows the right thing to say and does not shy away from the pain that we see and hear in a grieving person. This section will help you find the right words, better understand the cycles of grieving, and be better prepared to support not only our callers who are grieving, but the people in your own life who experience loss. Sometimes there is nothing to say at all. Being on the phone with a caller and being with them while they experience their grief can be impactful. Grief never ends, but it changes. It is a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is neither a sign of weakness nor a lack of faith. It is the price of love. Author unknown. It is important to remember that everyone grieves differently. Grieving is a personal and highly individual experience. How you grieve depends on many factors, including your personality and coping style, your life experience, your faith, and the nature of the loss. The grieving process takes time. Healing happens gradually. It can't be forced or hurried. And there is no normal timetable for grieving. Some people start to feel better in weeks or months. For others, the grieving process is measured in years. Whatever your grief experience, it is important to be patient with yourself and allow the process to naturally unfold. Grieving is not a weakness, it is a necessity. Grief is complicated. Refusing to grieve is not courageous. It may postpone inevitable reactions and may show up in other detrimental ways. The initial reaction of numbness often makes the later stages of strong physical and emotional upheaval all the more frightening. The grieving person is more likely to become ill. Existing illnesses may become worse, or they may develop psychosomatic disorders. The most clear manifestations of grief stem from deep emotional distress. Anxiety attacks, chronic fatigue, depression, up to the point of suicidal feelings, and obsession with the deceased are all common reactions to the death of a loved one. Guilt can also be a part of the grieving process. People may think of what they could have done differently. Unresolved quarrels with the deceased and loving words left unsaid come back to haunt us. We may feel guilt over the gratitude we feel when our loved one was finally free of pain. Grief is self-centered, but not in a bad way. We need all of our energy to cope with our own emotions. It is difficult to help others. As a result, the death of a loved one can wreak havoc on a family that seems to be falling apart just when they need each other the most. Through bereavement, though bereavement and grief are painful experiences, they're an integral part of life. We may feel that we will never get over it, but most people do. The pain might never go away completely, but we learn to live with it. Grief is time limited, not a permanent state or an identity. Grief is a noun. That means a deep sadness caused especially by someone's death, or a cause of deep sadness, or a trouble or annoyance. Bereavement is also a noun. It is the state of being sad because a family member or friend has passed away, or the death of a family member or friend. The better your understanding of grief and how it is healed, the better equipped you'll be to help a bereaved friend or family member. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. Grief does not always unfold in orderly or predictable stages. It can be an emotional roller coaster with unpredictable highs, lows, and setbacks. Everyone grieves differently, so try to avoid telling the bereaved what he or she should be feeling or doing. Grief may involve extreme emotions and behaviors. Feelings of guilt, anger, despair, and fear are common. A grieving person may yell to the heavens, obsess about death, lash out at loved ones, or cry for hours on end. The bereaved need reassurance that what he or she feels is normal. Don't judge them or take his or her grief reactions personally. There is no set timetable for grieving. For many people, recovery after bereavement takes 18 to 24 months, but for others, the grieving process may be longer or shorter. Don't pressure the bereaved to move on or make them feel like they've been grieving too long. This can actually slow the healing process. Part two. I don't know what to say. It is common to feel awkward when trying to comfort someone who's grieving. Often, the most helpful and important aspect to comfort is just being there, to listen, to encourage, to share the pain of the loss. In the case of a Telecare caller, we might hear things such as, all of my friends have left me. The people that I thought would be the most help are not around anymore. It can help to explain that this is common. Your friends are also experiencing their own grief, anger, and pain and are often unable to reach out for help when it is most needed. In North America especially, we live in isolation from others. Particularly in times of trouble, we don't express our true feelings and thoughts. We put on a brave face. When a death occurs, we are unable to express ourselves even to our closest friends, and as a result, walls are built that hinder our ability to effectively care for each other following a death. Often, just knowing that what we are experiencing is normal can help us to move through these difficult feelings. Please keep in mind that many of these tips and ideas are for use in your personal life or to relate to a caller who may be searching for ways to support people in their lives. As Telecare volunteers, we would never be visiting, calling, or sending cards to others. Acknowledge the situation. I heard that your blank died. Use the word died. That will show that you are more open to talk about how the person really feels. Be genuine in your communication and don't hide your feelings, such as, I'm not sure what to say, but I want you to know that I care. Ask how they feel. Don't assume that you know how the person feels on any given day. Offer your support. Tell me what I can do for you. Express your concern. I'm sorry to hear that this has happened to you. When someone you know is grieving, some practical tips. Tip one, Listen with compassion. Everyone worries about what to say to a grieving person, but knowing how to listen is much more important. The bereaved needs to know that their feelings are acknowledged, their loss is not too terrible to talk about, and that their loved one will not be forgotten. Let the bereaved person know that they have permission to speak about their loss. Talk candidly and do not avoid the subject. If it seems appropriate, ask open ended questions without being nosy that invite the person to openly express their feelings. Accept and acknowledge feelings. It is okay for the grieving person to cry, to get angry, or to break down. Do not try to reason with them over how they should or shouldn't feel. The bereaved should be able to express their feelings without fear of judgment, argument, or criticism. Do not be afraid of silence. Do not press the grieving person if they do not feel like talking. Your presence alone can offer comfort and support. Allow the bereaved to talk about their loved one and how they died. They may need to tell the story over and over as a way of processing and accepting the death. In telling the pain lessons, offer comfort and reassurance without minimizing the loss with comments such as, they are better off or it was their time. Grief is not about the deceased, it is about the living. Be willing to admit, I don't know, when a grieving person asks why. It is more often a cry of pain than a question that expects an answer. And be willing to open the dialogue. Many people think that no one wants to listen to their problems, so they are hesitant to reach out. Comments to avoid when comforting the bereaved, such as, I know how you feel. We can never fully understand or know how a person is feeling, particularly through such a difficult time of conflicting emotions. We might instead ask, how are you feeling? It's all God's plan. Introducing an idea such as this can make a person angry. They might respond with, what plan? No one told me of any plan. How could this be a good plan? It can also cause a person to turn away from their beliefs when perhaps they need them now more than ever. Look at all you still have to be thankful for. The person knows deep inside that they have much to be thankful for, but right now those things are not all that important. He or she is in a better place now. The bereaved may not hold the same beliefs. Keep your beliefs to yourself unless you are asked. This is behind you now. It's time to get on with your life. Moving on is easier said than done. The bereaved may be resistant to moving on because they feel this means forgetting his or her loved one. And just a note to avoid any statement that begins with you should or you will. These statements are too directive. If the bereaved is looking for suggestions, you might say, have you thought about, or do you think it would help to? Tip 2, offer practical assistance. It is often difficult for the grieving person to ask for help. They are in survival mode and do not even know themselves what would be helpful. They might feel guilty about receiving so much attention, fear of being a burden, or being too depressed to reach out. The following are some practical tips that can be used to assist people grieving in your personal life. These do not apply to Telecare callers for obvious reasons. For example, the grieving person may be unable to ask for help. However, there is no problem with leaving an open invitation, such as, I would like to be available to support you, or please let me know if there's anything I can do. Be there for as long as it takes. There is no set timeline for the grieving person to stop needing your support. When they are able, they will let you know that they have appreciated support and are feeling better to cope. There are many practical ways to help a grieving person, such as shop for groceries or run errands, drop off a casserole or other type of food, help with funeral arrangements, stay in his or her home to take phone calls and receive guests, help with insurance forms or bills, take care of housework such as cleaning or laundry, watch his or her children or pick them from school, drive him or her wherever he or she needs to go, look after his or her pets, go with them to a support group meeting, accompany them on a walk, take them to a lunch or movie, or share an enjoyable activity such as a game, puzzle, or art project. Tip 3, provide ongoing support. Grieving continues long after the funeral has passed and the flowers and cards have stopped arriving. The length of the grieving process varies from person to person. In general, grieving lasts much longer than you might expect. Some may need support for months, if not years. Continue your support over the long haul. Stay in touch with cards, calls, and visits. Your support is more valuable than ever once the funeral is over and the initial shock of the loss has worn off. Don't make assumptions based on appearances. The bereaved person may look fine on the outside while emotionally they are still suffering. Avoid comments such as, "You are so strong," or "You look so well." This puts pressure on the person to continue to keep up appearances and hide their true feelings. The pain of bereavement may never fully heal. Be sensitive to the fact that life may never feel the same. You just don't get over the death of a loved one. The bereaved person may learn to accept this loss over time. The pain may lessen in intensity, but the sadness may never completely go away. Offer extra support on special days. Certain times and days of the year will be particularly hard for your grieving friend or family member. Holidays, family milestones, birthdays, and anniversaries often reawaken grief. Be sensitive on these occasions. Let the bereaved person know that you're there for them, whatever he or she needs. And here are some resources for support group information. Tip 4, watch for warning signs. It is common for a grieving person to feel depressed, confused, or disconnected, perhaps as though they are going crazy. If these symptoms don't eventually begin to fade, or if they get worse over time, this could be a sign that normal grief has evolved into something more serious, such as clinical depression. Encourage the grieving person to seek professional help if you observe any of the following warning signs after the initial grieving period, particularly if it has been over a few months since the death, such as difficulty functioning in daily routines, extreme focus on death, excessive bitterness, anger, or guilt, neglecting personal hygiene, a change in alcohol or substance abuse, inability to find enjoyment, hallucinations, withdrawing from others, constant feelings of hopelessness, talking about dying, or suicide. It can be tricky to bring up concerns without being perceived as intrusive or invasive. Using your effective communication skills, try mirroring or reflecting your concerns, state your own feelings, and look for invitations to explore options. For example, "So you have said that you are really tired because you are still having difficulty sleeping since the funeral. It is hard for you to function now that you are back to work. I'm concerned that you are still not sleeping well. How would you feel about talking to your doctor about your insomnia?" The medicine wheel. There are many images of the cycle of grief depicted as wheels, journeys, waterfalls, and roller coasters. The wheel seems to be the most common theme. The process of grief, like any other life process, is never neat and tidy. People don't move through the stages and then pop out the far side feeling better and ready to move on. More often, a person will move back and forth between the stages until they come to a point where they have come full circle and are spending more time in the life as usual stage, as depicted in the grieving wheel developed by Hospice Yukon, which is based on the circular design of the indigenous medicine wheel. And so what this looks like is a loss occurs, shock, acknowledgement, chaos, new understanding, new beginnings, integration, and then life as usual. Many of our regular repeat callers are grieving things that cannot easily be reconciled, such as loss of emotional or mental health, loss of innocence through abuse or trauma, and other life-changing situations. This causes many of our callers to remain trapped in the circle and unable to get to the life as usual for any period of time. While there is no set time for grieving, it is commonly thought that by 6 months to a year, people should be experiencing more of the life as usual stage and spending less time in the chaos. However, for some, this does not happen, and they are experiencing complicated grief. These people are so traumatized by the death that they cannot process their grief, and they sink into depression and crisis, even contributing to thoughts of suicide. The most characteristic symptoms are intrusive thoughts, memories or images of the deceased person, and a painful yearning for his or her presence. People experiencing complicated grief might engage in denial of the death, imagining that the dead person is alive, desperate loneliness, helplessness, anger, and bitterness, and wanting to die themselves. There are many effective treatment options for those dealing with complicated grief, but this is beyond the scope of Telecare. It may be appropriate to suggest connecting a caller with a professional counselor, therapist, or grief support group if you believe that they are experiencing complicated grief. The tier model of grief. Rituals and funerals are important in helping us to grieve and process death. Funerals serve as a gathering place for mourners, a place to be able to offer our support, a place where your very presence lets everyone know that they are not alone in their grief. Funeral rituals help us to meet the reconciliation needs of grief and begin the healing as modeled in the tier below. So, the tasks of grief: T, to accept the reality of the loss. E, experience the pain of the loss. A, adjust to the new environment without the lost person. And R, reinvest in the new reality. So, to accept the reality of death. Once a loved one has died, we must openly acknowledge that reality and the finality of death in order to move forward with our grief. Often, we begin to accept the reality as we make the funeral arrangements and attend the funeral. To experience the pain of loss, as we move from understanding the loss intellectually to acknowledging it emotionally, we must express the painful thoughts and feelings, often through tears, sobs, and even wailing. These things that are often viewed as only acceptable at a funeral. But we at Telecare offer a safe space for callers to do this on the phone. We can encourage them to process their grief in these ways whenever it comes up for them and they feel safe. Remember the person who has died. A funeral gives us the opportunity to focus on the loved one through making plans and with their wishes in mind, and sharing stories and memories of them in a eulogy or in less formal ways. Develop a new identity. When a loved one dies, we lose a part of our identity, perhaps as a parent, a partner, or a sibling. A funeral is the first time that our network will come together, supporting us in our new role, acknowledging our changed identity, and declaring their support. Search for meaning. This does not have to be a religious or spiritual meaning. However, as each funeral we attend causes us to think of our own mortality, we can search for meaning in our own lives. Death is important, and many people use it as a motivation to live as fully and as healthily as possible. Receive ongoing support from others. Funerals are an invitation for support, an invitation to embrace, to cry, and to comfort one another. And here are some resources for further reading. That completes part 2. Just going to check to see if there are more modules in this unit, or if we are in the self-evaluation stage. Excellent. So if you're following along on another device, you're free to continue on to the self-evaluation exercises. And for everyone else, we will see you in the next unit, which will be Unit 7, on the topic of loneliness.